cloud, but I'm starting the recording now. So that means I'm going to send out a link for the recording for those folks who weren't able to join, and also for you who are here. So if for some reason you can't join the whole thing, don't worry. We will record, and there will be a way to catch the things that you missed. So that was just a little heads up. So a welcome here. My name is Line Mørkbak. I am based in Denmark currently. I have just recently moved back from North America and was based in the US on the West Coast in Portland, Oregon. I'm a global collaboration facilitator. I'm not originally from software or Agile, but work a lot with Agile-inspired practices, which is what we're going to talk about today. I work with a lot of different dynamics in terms of team collaboration and how I get good voice and language for teams to really excel and hear each other. Also in terms of a cultural sense. I'm a certified Management 3.0 facilitator, so that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about today here as well. The objective for this webinar is to give you a bit of a teaser, a bit of a taste of some of those engaging ways that teams can start working with more complexity and self-organizing within their teams, and we're going to look at some of the management content, Management 3.0 content. Today I'm also joined by Sari Hi Hossein, who's based out of Sweden. Do you want to just introduce yourself, Sari, so people know what you are bringing to this call here today?
Yes, absolutely. So my name is Sari, and I am an IT consultant with Altron. I'm mostly into IT project management. My skill set lies at the intersection between, if you want, older approaches to project management, those that focus on processes and entities, and the newer approaches to project management, those that focus on people, agile-oriented approaches. I'm glad to be collaborating with Lean on this talk, and I would like to welcome you all again to this, and let's get started.
Good. Let's get started. Thank you. So Sari is going to keep an eye on the chat and also kind of interject with different examples and different points of view. I would love this to be engaging in as many ways that we can. So we're going to use the chat quite a bit. We're also not going to break out in a couple of just small groups to discuss. And then also please just any questions that comes up, either go on the phone line, raise your hand, or go on the audio here, or write in the chat, and we'll try and incorporate as much as possible. I definitely want to give you some teasers around these team practices, but also want to give you a chance to exchange and discuss a little bit with each other. We have an hour, so it's going to be tight, but this is also a way to kind of connect people and introduce some mythology and some context for folks who might be new to some of this. So that's our objectives for our hour here together. So I want to hear, a little curious, what made you sign up for this webinar? What brings you here? What's your curiosity? What's maybe questions you have or things you already working with? You heard of Management 3.0 maybe. You maybe know, Sari, I know several people signed up from the Swedish region through the Scrum Alliance and where this was posted. So please write in the chat, what brings you here? What are the things that was a curiosity, a question that you have for this webinar? And for those of you who have just joined, welcome. We're just getting started, so please locate the chat. It's in the either top or lower bar. Under more, there should be a chat function, and you can write in there. So please, I'm just waiting here, so please write in the chat, what brings you here? See several people are joining here, so welcome. Don't worry that you're joining a little bit after we started. We're just getting into it, and I ask fairly broadly, what brings you to this webinar? What was your curiosity? What was the reason that you signed up? So, okay, heard about it from a shared friend. Not so new to Management 3.0, say Max. Bit of Leadership 4.0, yes. Interested to learn more about what people are doing in terms of more human-centric, adaptable businesses. Yes, that's a lot of what we'll be talking about here. So you are in the right place. Dragan is saying, generally, to understand how to increase commitment. Okay, in virtual teams. Excellent. We might get a chance to talk a little bit about that, Dragan, but that's perfect. And was invited, sound interesting, up for the challenge, up for the invitation. Good, thank you. Interest in Management 3.0, and finding out if Kadri is saying if you should invest more time into it. Good. So that's all. You're here for the right reasons. We want to make sure that we're also covering some of the virtual stuff, as that's Dragan's interest here as well. Matthias is saying interesting in Management 3.0 tools. Good. Good. And better agile manager. Good. That's what we want to hear. Let's improve those managing skills. Let's expand how we even look at what management is. Excellent. So Sarah's going to keep keeping an eye on the chat here, and I'm going to move a little bit forward. But this gives us a good idea of what's going on. I can see that we've got some connotation going on. I'm just going to clear that. So as we're starting here, let's just throw ourselves right into it. Our world, guess what, is very complex. When we're starting looking at how our natural world operates, when we're starting looking at how messages is being processed through our brain, when we're looking at mathematicians have been looking at memorations of starlings, like thousands of birds, and trying to understand how can they navigate, is there central control, and what they keep coming down to, both when they're looking at the natural world and also when they're looking at our inner world, we're keeping getting these messages from our researchers that it's not command and control. It's not one T cell who's turning on our consciousness. It's not there is not one place that's making sure in our bodies that our immune system is being taken care of. And also when we're looking at these, either the anthill, bees, or these memorations of starlings, of thousands of birds, it's not one person who's in charge. Actually, it's a lot more complex. It's typically non-linear. So it's breaking some of these patterns in terms of how we're thinking that things are moving through a hierarchy of someone is in charge and then things are moving down the ladder. So when we're looking at our natural world, we can look how there's not this central control in place. Instead, that there is a constant feedback that's moving back. When mathematicians are looking at starlings memorating, they can see that it's typically 2 or 3 keeps taking turns in terms of being leadership, and it's new birds that constantly stepping into that leadership role. So there's a lot for us to learn in terms of that. What's interesting is that we are typically in our management setups and how we're looking at our organizations, we're looking at how our organizations are more linear, and this is how we're typically used to thinking and used to using our rationale. So when our traditional managers are faced with complexity, the natural instinct is to go in and try and control that. Go in and get some procedures in place, some best practices, a way to kind of harness that complexity. we want to try and look at and be inspired about is, instead of doing that, can we navigate, can we get some skills in getting the courage to actually be in the complexity instead. So that's what we want to look at today, because there's a lot of richness in there. That's when we actually have a flexibility to move with what comes up, to navigate with whatever comes our way, and very quickly being able to maneuver through it, because it's not getting bottlenecked through the system as such. So if we're looking at this label of Management 3.0, what's really behind it? So we're taking a step back, and we're looking at what's typically is labeled as Taylorism from the 1880s, and Frederick Taylor, who were the one who started looking at the organization as a machine, and how can we be more efficient and specialize when we're looking at big manufacturings, but also when we're looking at how our organizations are managed. So this becomes then specialization and siloing. So this is what we're calling Management 1.0. This is where the lens is that organizations is managed top down. This is command and control. This is where we know exactly who's in charge where, both in terms of titles but also pay structure. Then we're having, and this is what Jürgen Appello is saying, well, Management 2.0, and other people have labeled it this as well, where we're getting some more looking into how could we expand management. People would say that this is where there's some trends. It's still the assumption that management is top down, and it's assuming that that's the organization that needs to have in place. So when we're talking about management by objective, if we're talking about Six Sigma and things like that, balanced scorecard, we are exploring some more management techniques, but really still there is this underlying assumption that we're still working within that existing hierarchy. When we're looking at 3.0, this is when Management 3.0, this is when the assumptions are now changing. And instead of assuming that we have the hierarchy, we're now assuming the network. And we're looking at organizations as systems that's living and not predictable, that we can map them out, but we're taking on this premise of the complexity and looking what we can actually, taking that on fully, and fully honoring that that's our circumstances, but then also knowing that we have to rewire how we are navigating within our organizations. And some of our schools, some of the language, some of the techniques and skills we have as colleagues within teams. So let me ask here into the chat, in your organization, in your teams, where do you see these different levels, like Management 1.0, maybe Management 2.0, or maybe some traces of Management 3.0 play itself out? So please use the chat here, and I'm going to pause. Where do you see some of this playing itself out? Where you are sitting in the organizations that you are taking where you are, either where you have clients, where you are Agile coach in, or where the teams that you're in. So please add to the chat here, so we can get some of your reflections on where you're seeing this. Steve is saying none of the above. Interested. I'm curious to hear a little bit more. And Max is saying the biggest issue is in large traditional organizations, the willingness of typical management to believe that coping with complexity means letting go of 2.0 processes such as KPIs. Good. And that doesn't necessarily mean that, right? So Max, actually, would you go on the phone line, say a little bit more, on the audio line, say a little bit more of that, about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's people can understand that things are complex, but they are often addicted, if you like, in my experience, to the belief that everything can be controlled and planned out in incredible amounts of detail with more and more complex models and so on. That's not to say that models are useless, but if we're really going to be in a complex world, which is, as you say here, not predictable, how much are we willing to let things emerge? You know, so it's finding the right balance.
Yes, yeah. Thanks for adding that. And I can say people are then also adding, well, they're seeing 1.0 trying to go 2.0, seeing 1 and 2.0, not so much 3.0 yet. Good. And Kadri is saying some thoughts for 3.0, but big foot interruptions, like the organization is not as ready yet. And we can discuss that more about how much can we actually start experimenting and messing with it and being inspired without rocking the boat. And especially if we're linking back to what Max was hinting here also, like the more large traditional organizations, what are they ready for? And how much of that uncertainty and how can we throw ourselves and our colleagues into? And that's actually one of the reasons that I personally got very interested in the Management 3.0 material, because I feel it's great tools that's actually helping us in some of that process. We don't have to go fully on board, do the revolution tomorrow, get everyone on board. There's a lot of steps in that, and guess what? It's going to look different in all different organizations. So that's one of the things that we're going to we have to also embed in this. There's not going to be like a nice neat formula we can just unplug, learn by heart, and then go. There's a lot of things here on that whole let it emerge, as Max is saying here. Good. Okay, thank you for sharing that. It gives us a little bit more ideas of where the different aspects of where you guys are at. Steve is also adding here more ad hoc network organization, living under 1.0, but with a strategy that's taken us 2.0, but with the objectives too high to be actionable. Okay, so there's something about it being too visionable, too much vision, and let's get it be more tangible and actually be something that we actually can move around. And again, hopefully some of these techniques within Management 3.0 is going to be a little bit more on the tangible side, so that Steve, you can also have something that you can make it more actionable instead of it being too high flying. Good. Thank you, guys and ladies. So let me just unfold a little bit more what's behind this label Management 3.0. So a couple of books came out. Here we are. Jürgen Appello wrote his first book back in 2010, and then his next book, Managing for Happiness, came out in 2016. The first book, Management 3.0, really we're looking at, like, he scanned the whole arena at that time in terms of all the experimentation that was going on, how things were changing around how we're looking at our organizational structure, and he mapped a lot of that out. Jürgen himself would be the first to say that he's not necessarily the big architect of one big idea. He loves to just steal and tweak and figure out what could work, and that's actually, in my opinion, what he's really good at. He's very good at mapping out what's out there, how can we use it, and especially the second book, Managing for Happiness, have a lot of concrete tools. Some of them we're going to be looking at today, little games and ways that you can start taking some of this more floaty theory more down to a level where it works within our teams. So his biggest piece, one of his biggest pieces, and you'll see me here saying this frequently, and here is also like, management's actually way too important within our organizations that we can just leave it to managers. Back to this notion of our starlings doing their memorations, there's not one person in control. We can get inspired by managers. Management have a role. That role is transforming, but we cannot just leave it to managers. So Management 3.0 is also management tools for everyone in the team, for the managers, for the agile coaches, for the scrum masters, but also for everyone who's in that team and team members. for those of you who are interested in more of some of this sharing and thoughts, if you don't know about the Happy Melee Network, it can be an interesting network to be part of, and they have a very active Slack channels where different people from all over the world using Management 3.0, but also discussing other emerging team practices, emerging ways of looking at things that's happening in our workplaces. So just kind of want to plug that in. So why is Management 3.0 a practical tool in my point of view? So I think it's a very, very good starting point if you want to start to incorporate new work practices and you don't know where to start. There's literally like just few tools, as I mentioned before, you can start messing around with tomorrow. It's inspired by incorporating some of those new current tools and practices that's out there. In the conversation with Management 3.0 practitioners, you will also see a lot of experimentation and tweaking. So all these tools are constantly being improved on and being tweaked into the context in both different organizational contexts and cultural contexts that they're being used. Very hands-on and very inviting for all teams. And there is this overall notion of experimentation. Try it out, see where it takes you, boil it down to something that feels safe, and then start experimenting with it. And I'm actually wondering here, sorry, if you want to add a little bit about why you have been intrigued with the Management 3.0, some of the concepts and the tools as well.
Yes, absolutely. When it comes to Agile, I mean, Agile, I would define it as a family of behaviors, concepts, frameworks, and techniques. If you look at the market over the past years since the Manifesto for Agile Development was sent out, you will immediately observe that there has been a lot of focus on frameworks, on creating more and more rules and having delivery teams abide by those rules. I mean, I'd rather understand the notion of agility. I'd rather understand how to be agile. For me, I mean, agility is being able to explore competitive speed, flexibility, innovation in this complex digital era, rather than actually introducing more and more frameworks and creating more and more rules and then imposing those rules on delivery teams. And it seems to me that Management 3, with its abundance of hands-on games and exercises, actually offers that entry point of experimentation and actually finding what your delivery team really needs, instead of doing things by the book, grabbing the Scrum guide and doing it by the book. Exactly. or grabbing the PEM book, the project management body of knowledge, and doing it by the book. You'll most likely not need that. I mean,
exactly.
Yes, you really need to tailor it to your delivery team. And this is the starting point. These hands-on games and these experiments are the starting points, and they are offered out of the books and free of charge on the Management 3 website.
Yes. And actually Max is adding a great comment here, that he's saying, well, sometimes even though the intention is that these rules and processes are put in place to help us, it often actually hinders that, and we become further away from hearing each other and further away from the collaboration piece. And then actually I would say also further away from the experimentation. And part of the experimentation is that we as colleagues get ownership of whatever process or whatever thing works for our team. If we're experimenting with it and we are actually tweaking it and designing it ourselves, then we have ownership around it, right? And then that becomes something that wasn't put out, like there wasn't a system up from above, but we were actually owning it and creating it ourselves. So there's a lot around that, and we'll dive into that a little bit more around this piece of self-organization. So if we're then, I want to take this last link. So if we're having this, if we're really signing on to the complexity theory, and control is really centralized, and then it's distributed, it's shared between all those different parts, then what does that look like? Well, it also means that we're having our organization are these adaptive systems, all these parts that are constantly need to change our behavior in terms of what comes next. What does our clients want? What does our stakeholders want? What do we need from each other? And we need to have that adaptability and be agile, as you're saying, within our organization. So what does it look like? So it can look like, here's some examples. So the essence here is like set the system up. Don't manage the people, and if you don't manage the people and don't do micromanaging, get systems up, and then systems, these are the ones that constantly can get tweaked and we can experiment with, and that manage the system doesn't mean that managers is managing the system, but the team is managing the system here, right? And here's some examples, like incorporating more intrinsic motivators, and we'll look at how that can look. Also, notion of self-organization. How much can we split up with maybe open allocation, agendaless meetings, open space, ways of running our meetings and our idea generation, and then also supporting ways that we can have this experimentation within our culture, our organizational culture. So I know I'm a little bit. I want to share more of these tools with you, but I also want to make sure that you have a chance to connect and hear a little bit and discuss a little bit with each other. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to throw you into some breakout rooms. And let's just see how many we are. I'm going to start the breakout. You're not going to have crazy long, but let me just see. I'm going to create, just bear with me here. I'm going to create 3 or 4 rooms. Let's see. Actually, here. Good. Just one more. Bear with me here. So I created 3 different rooms, and I'm just gonna let you be in there for 5 minutes. Really, I know it's a little bit tough one, but I want to make sure that we also come back and do a few other things. But I want you to get a chance to connect a little bit with each other. What I want you to discuss in your breakouts is, what is your curiosity in your current team for some of these new team practices? Where is maybe some of the stumbling blocks, some of the things that holding people back? Are people ready, but you don't know where to start? Is it only you as the coach, as a team lead, as a team member who's curious about this, but others in your team are not really? So how can you get them on board? So I'm just going to give you 5-6 minutes in these breakout rooms, and then I'm going to bring you all back. So what's your curiosity and readiness for new team practices, your own and also in your current team? Okay, there you are. I'm going to give you a heads up when there's 2 minutes left. So welcome back. We're just still waiting for the breakout rooms are closing in 30 seconds. So people are slowly coming back now. Welcome back. We're just waiting for everyone to come back from the breakout. So the breakouts are closing in 10 seconds. So we'll have the last people come back and join us. Okay, so the breakouts are closing now, and everyone is coming back here. Welcome back. I know that was very, very short for you to have a little bit of a conversation, but I would love to just hear either on the audio here or in the chat from each of the group, like hear a couple of thoughts of what you shared that's valuable for the rest of us. So. Anyone who wants to share a little bit what you discussed in your groups?
Yeah, maybe I can say a few words. It seemed that plenty of people were starting to experiment with things, but facing various levels of resistance from people to kind of get engaged.
Yes. So sometimes that can be like, okay, we're curious, but where people are not ready and don't feel ready yet. Good. Excuse me. So that was group Max was like people starting experimenting but getting some resistance. Does that echo what other people were experiencing, or let's hear from?
No, I mean in our group we were talking about quite a wide range of from confusion to curiosity, and sort of a means to an end for introducing great collaboration across different product lines and different service lines.
Okay. Yes.
And also my feeling was that we're already in 3.0, but not purposefully in 3.0. So we don't have the system to manage. The system isn't there, but we're not managing people in 1 and 2 as a whole, but we've got silos that have been managed as 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And I think there's definitely some readiness, and we shared that around.
Yeah.
But I think one of the consensuses we had was that we can't manage it with the same KPIs. The objectives you use, from number 2, cannot be the same objectives that we'll use in number 3.
Yes, and that's one of the pieces here also, like, well, we need to start looking at, as you're saying, in some ways we're already operating in this because we're so matrixed and also sometimes virtual, and there's a lot of complexity in that. So there's a lot of real life that just makes us actually navigating in this, but do we have the tools, and are we fully taking that on, that this is what our workplace and work situations looks like, right? Good, thank you. Okay, so a chance for you to hear and talk a little bit with each other and not just hearing me and also Sari's input here. So a little bit of a teaser, but also a way for you to get more of a sense of what other people are doing out there. Good. Thank you. So I want to dive in a little bit on these notions as we were talking about. Well, there is intrinsic motivators, and incorporating this is some of the ways that we can start actually having some of these practices incorporated. It can seem small, but it's a ways to kind of start getting new mechanisms in place, new language, if you may, and some new tools in place as we're looking at our workplaces and the way we're looking at our colleagues differently. So in terms of intrinsic motivators, it can be looking at our folks differently, looking at them broader, looking at people being T-skilled, not just having specialization, but also having that breadth, because if we're needing people to also be more self-organized, we're going to need a bigger breadth within our team structures and the team resources we have in terms of the people itself. So that's one way of looking at it. Replacing job titles is another way of like breaking some of the ways that we are tied into what our job our job titles are fixed at, and being a little bit creative, but also looking at our job titles as something that we're responding to a need, and that need is what's covered right now. That might be a different need in 6 months from now, in a year from now. And that way of replacing job titles within a team, we might not all be able to replace it out to the outer world, but within a team, sometimes we can replace those job titles and make it very obvious for ourselves and also our colleagues that we are in a flux, and this is the needs I'm covering at this moment, and that's going to change. So it's linked into this T-shaped as well. And on that notion of T-shaped, so we're also starting talking about being E-shaped, being someone who also have expertise across many areas, and that part becomes that exploratory and innovation part as well. But breaking down how we're looking at the resources that people are coming into our team with. So that's one way around the intrinsic motivators. Teams are also then encouraging to have different ways of being organized within our organization, within our teams and structures, in terms of business skills or community of practices. And I could see that Jonathan was on here just before. I'm wondering, Jonathan, Lewis, if you want to add a little bit about what you're doing in your organization in terms of business skills and some inspiration there.
Sure, okay. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Hi.
Hi. So yeah, we actually, this was something we took from Spotify, and then I think later discovered that Management 3.0 was also the source. And we've tended to replace sort of those roles where people become quite stressed. Perhaps their role is to coordinate a lot of people, a lot of complexity, or where it becomes contentious in terms of arguments about what technology to use or what approach to take, where actually you really benefit from a group of people and their various opinions. However, you don't want those guilds to really become a talking shop where people just argue forever and never settle on anything. So we use the sociocracy principle of consent decision making, which I guess maybe that's something we could follow up with later line or something. But that allows us to get everybody's input on decisions to make to help coordinate lots of complex activities. Without compromising so much that nobody's happy with the outcome. So these guilds, they meet every 2 to 4 weeks, and they can be right from coordinating schedules across multiple teams to defining best practice for software development or something like that. Okay. And they've been genuinely very, very successful. The thing we're struggling with is making sure that people have the skills to facilitate that sort of approach. So yes. That's the tension at the moment for us.
Yeah. Thank you, Jonathan. And actually, that's an excellent point here. As we're starting looking at broadening out some of that expertise within an organization and also decision making, as was Jonathan is saying, instead of having 1 or 2 people making the decision around which tool to invest in or what technology to use, then you're having a group of people, but then you also need to make sure those people have skills, communication skills, facilitation skills, being able to deal with the conflicts that comes up when they're now organized in these guilds, instead of just relying back to the manager to solve issues when it gets messy in the sandbox, right? Like, so having those aspects come in there as well. But what we're looking at here is how can we incorporate these intrinsic motivators and bring more of that into our work. So if we're in business skills, this can be our deep passions who are now starting being something we can actually bring to work, and similar to when we have community of practice within certain organizations. And please just follow the chat here. As I can see, there's a lot of excellent comments. I could just see Max, who's also commenting on some experimentations they've done at Airbus, where he's been previously. Within the Management 3.0 material and content, there's a game called Moving Motivators, which is just this simple card game. It's not actually a game as such, but it's a set of cards, which is looking at different things that motivate us in a work-life context. And this can be there, and you can go on the Management 3.0 website, download them, print them out. You can also order them and get like nicer cards like these ones, but it's something that you could use already now with your team, where a colleague of mine have used it specifically with an HR team, going in and giving them a set of cards, and then individually they would lay them out of their priorities. What are some of the things that motivates them most? What are things that's less motivating? As a team, that then went in and rated them and saying, oh, what are things that's linked within our team that we think is important? So they actually ended up dialing down of 3 or 4 motivating factors that became, these can be things that motivate us as a whole. So these can be used for managers to have conversations, one-on-one conversation with team members. They can also be used within a team to open up that conversation broader on what really motivates me, besides what's my salary, what's my job title, what's my responsibilities, because I might need a lot of relatedness, and that's some of the things that motivates me at work. That's not coming across in typically how we are looking at each other in terms of job titles and the things that we're sharing in terms of what we like about our work. So if we want to create more of that intrinsic motivators within our job structures, we then also need to have that conversation. So these cards are some of the things that's in the Management 3.0 that's up for grasp and that you can use. I'm moving ahead here because I want to share a little bit more around also the self-organizing. I am wondering though, Sari, is there anything you want to add in terms of why these motivating factors can be important for us within our teams and the team dynamics we have?
Yes, absolutely. I can actually give a simple example. One of these motivating factors would be social acceptance. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So certain people have high desire for social acceptance, while others have lower desire. So normally people who have higher desire for social acceptance, they don't really appreciate harsh feedback. So that is something that you need to take into account when giving feedback to your team members. So if you know beforehand that this team member and this team member, okay, they enjoy being socially accepted, then you would possibly adjust your feedback a little bit, or you would send your feedback possibly in a more diplomatic way. You would forward your feedback in a more diplomatic way. So that's what I'm saying. I mentioned in the chat box that these motivating factors are intrinsic. We are born with them, as a matter of fact. We are born with these intrinsic motivators. They are very important in designing the team, in handling the team dynamics, and also resolving conflicts. And I gave a direct example. A conflict will arise between the team member and the management if the feedback is harsh, given that that team member is fond of being socially accepted. So overall, the management should aim at understanding these motivators. Don't try to eliminate these motivators. You can. They are intrinsic. We are born with them. You can't eliminate them. You need to embrace them, and you need to address them properly instead.
Yeah. Good. And actually going back to Jonathan's point earlier of like, well, what we're then finding in people being in these skills, then they also need the skills to collaborate with each other and resolve things that comes up. And that can be one way is to understand, well, what makes my colleague tick? What's important for them? What's a project that's important that they have ownership on? What's another project that's maybe not so important? Where it's important that I can step forward and I get a chance to really dig deep, because this is something that's a deep motivator for me. Max is also adding here, well, isn't it also important that we have that conflict? And I would say yes. It's not that we shouldn't have the conflict, but that we should be good at navigating and have the tools, because we want to break through from like we're having a conflict and then look up the hierarchy, like come solve it for us, right? Like that we need to be able to solve it within that group dynamic. Good, thank you. We're opening up a lot of different conversations here and really just kind of tasting them. So, and Dragon is sensing here, oh, it's a conflict over matter or over personalities. So that's good, having some of that input in here as well. So when we're also looking at other agile team practices, it's the whole notion around self-organization, which I know a lot of people get engaged in and be like, this is what we want. We want to spread out that autonomous, have that autonomy in our teams, and how can we do that? The overall notion of why it's important for us to have more self-organization, of course, is that if we're really taking on this notion that and realizing that our work is very, very complex, then we also need to acknowledge there's not one person who has an overall big picture of what would work well and what won't work well. We need to make sure that all those pieces in the network, all those components, all of us are going to make sure that we have input to make the right decision in those different areas. So that's where self-organizing comes in. For a lot of people, it's scary and it seems messy and chaotic. Very true. So that's why I actually want to give a couple of examples of what it can look like, what self-organizing can look like, a little bit more tangible. So in some organization, they work with open allocation, and I actually want to bring up an organization I work with in Portland, Oregon, JAMA Software, who they've gone into they have periods where they had no managers, then they put managers back in place. They've experimented back and forth depending on the size of the organization and how they were growing. But what they're working with right now in terms of open allocation is that they have these every 2 months they have like a marketplace where all the product owners are coming up and saying these are the products that's up there, and then everyone within the teams then goes around at the job fair and figures out what project they want to be on for the next period. Of course, the product owner can go and say, well, we need these different kind of people for this project. Well, we also might need people that we don't know at this point. So there might become people again talking about the T-shape or even the E-shaped resources. There might be people coming to that project that have a different set of resources, and that's going to shape how that project then comes across. So the notion here is that instead of product owner, team lead, manager says, this is the people I want on my team, it's open job fair, here is the projects, and then people are self-selecting in terms of what they want to be part of. So that's one way of setting a system in place in terms of having open allocation. Then there's something like just running meetings and not having a set agenda, and not having one person who set the agenda, but do lean coffee style or agenda-less open space kind of meetings as well. That's another example of how we can do self-organizing. Another a tool from the Management 3.0 toolkit I want to bring forth is these delegation poker cards. So these are literally a game of cards. There are 7 that each individual has within a team. And this is where a decision is broken down into 7 different ways that we can say this is the level we think this decision should be made at. So number 1 is I will decision is made and then it's explained by team lead. So number 1 is that it's made, like full authority, one person's making that decision and then sharing with the team. Number 2 is that decision is made, but I have to convince the team that this is the right decision that was made. Okay, so they mirror each other in each end. 1 mirrors 7 and 2 mirrors 5. So if we go down and then we have 3 is that I will consult with the team, and then as a team lead, I will decide what's best. So that's delegation 3 here. Delegation 4 is full consensus, which means that everyone is agreeing together. Team lead or manager is in here with everybody else in terms of making the decision. And then we have 5, which is mirroring 3, but on the other end here. So this is where the team will be advised by, like they'll take advice from their team lead, from the manager, but they will decide. And then 6 is where they will inquire with the team lead or the manager after they made the decision. And 7 is where the manager is not part of it at all. The team has completely just self-organized and figured out how they want it fully delegated. So the team lead, the manager is out of it as well, out of the whole equation. So the way that you can use these cards and how I've used them with different teams is to learn, find out for a team what is the right steps for us to actually make decisions, and what kind of decisions are we ready to have be fully delegated. Out would be 7. Which ones might be where we're agreeing that's a 3. So it's giving folks a vocabulary around how do we want to delegate these decisions out. So for example, you can play the game with a team and saying, let's say we want to redesign our office space. What level of delegation would we use? And then everyone is having their 7 cards. They're then saying, oh, I think it's a 4, and someone else says it's a 2. And then you're arguing and discussing among you until you find out what is the delegation level that we think this particular decision should be at. What it can end up looking at for a team is that you make a whole delegation board. And this delegation board can change over time. So it would be like for a team to have this delegation board in their team space and saying, well, now we made the decision that for certain things, we want our manager to step in and decide our office hours. But then in terms of team membership, we want to make sure that we will advise, but we want to make sure that our team lead is advising us, but we're deciding. Right, so that's what this decided at this point. So then you're slowly helping teams to decide themselves what are they feeling comfortable with in terms of self-organizing. Okay, so what's happening now, of course, is our time is running fast. So these are some of the examples that we see within Management 3.0. So what I want to just quickly pitch here is that I run these, there are several face-to-face Management 3.0 workshops happening throughout Europe and throughout, there's some in Brazil, some in North America as well. On the Management 3.0 website, you can see them. These tools that I've showed you here, you can go on the website and print them and just start using them. If you're curious and more, I run online workshops run over a month typically. So it's a cohort where we have 4 sessions of 2 hours. We use Zoom as we're using here. We have different discussions and examples. We have small groups, and then we also have a learning partner dialogue between sessions where you play some games, you have self-reflection, you're adding to different online boards where you're commenting on some of your own reflections. So we have a lot of in between our sessions, and we're doing a full 4 weeks where we're focusing how can we experiment with some of this, and how can we implement some of these agile team practices within our own teams. So that's overall the setup that I run. My next workshop is in November, and until next week I have this little 20% off. So if you want to join, use the code M30WEP, Management 3.0 WEP, and then I'll give you a 20%. I want to make sure that we're also capturing any questions that is left. This is a little bit of tour de force here in the end. So if you have any Q&A, any questions here, if there's anything, is anything left in the chat? I could see there is some comments in terms of connecting later and stuff. So I haven't been able to... where do we find the sign up for your course? Okay, yes, I'm gonna send out the recording, and then I'll send the link specifically where you can sign up, Max. So that's gonna come out in an email in this recording. I don't wanna be jumping back and forth between my windows right now. But else, if maybe someone else has it right up, if you have the link, you can post it. But then I also just want to hear from folks, maybe just a couple of keywords. What were your takeaways from what we've discussed for this hour? I know I've thrown a lot of different ideas out there. It's a little ambitious on what I want to try and cover in an hour here. So Steve is saying interesting, good. There's some food for thought here. That's always a good thing. Thanks for sharing that, Steve. What are some other keywords or maybe questions or just kind of things that pop up from other folks on the line here? Let me hear. Good. Kadri is saying, I guess we're using 3.0 a lot without knowing about it. Good, good. And sorry, thank you, sorry, to being on my backup here. So that's the link right there in terms of the link, the sign up for the workshop in November. Several level of delegation was a takeaway. Good. Jonathan is liking the delegation poker. Jonathan, let me hear. What do you think is something that where the poker game can be useful?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think we could actually start it with our leadership team, actually, and because I think certainly where we're at, it's a bit ambiguous sometimes, and there's a lot of conversations, and maybe it's just a good way for us to build the terminology and clarification around what we mean. So yeah, that's probably a start at the top, I guess. Yeah, I
like that. And one thing I actually really like about these cards is that 4 is the consensus piece. Like all 5, 6, 7, that's like how much more are you taking out that team lead, that manager out of the equation. But like how much do they need to be in there because from expertise, budget, okay, or whatever, right? Like, but we can do that, breaking down those grades of the decision making, but still taking some of this ownership in terms of making the decisions more self-organized. Good. And Max is saying he's pleased to see the free resources. Someone else was adding something, please.
Yes, thanks for the webinar, by the way. It's really interesting for the Management 3.0. As in our company, Altran, I can see that we are already in 3.0 management. But my question is, as you say that this management is not controlling people, but controlling the system. Mm-hmm. My question is, do you have any tools to see how we can make some criteria for the success? How do we know if we are going in the right direction? How do we know that we are achieving the success we want to achieve within this complexity thinking way of working?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's also a very big question.
It is.
How do we measure it? And I would even be a little bit devil's advocate of saying, maybe we need to step away from the notion that it needs to be measurable in that same way that we're used to. I think in many ways, if we're going in the right direction, is a balance between upper management in terms of what their vision is, but also a temperature check. What is our teams? What do they feel they're needing right now? Are they hungry for more? Do they feel that there's plenty going on in terms of new ways of incorporating? As you're saying, we're already doing some of this. So I think as you're integrating more of these practices, I think it's important to step on and off the gas pedal. And someone actually was just commenting here, there's another thing that we use within Management 3.0 called the celebration grid, going in and saying what aspects are we experimenting with, and what aspects, and what are we learning from that experimentation, and what are we ready to experiment with? Because sometimes there's things like, well, that's way too big, can we break it down? And then saying, oh, instead of as a company doing exploration days, for example, there might be a team who's saying, we're gonna be doing exploration days and take a day out and just fully develop something from A to Z that we don't know what is, but we're going to work 24 hours on it. But and then as an organization, we can learn from what that team learned, where that experiment was going on. So I think it's about breaking it down. But I'm curious to hear what other people are saying, maybe have as input in terms of how can we measure and how can we make sure we're on the right track.
I mean, there are. I mean, I think there is plenty of indications that would tell you that your team got good health and got good dynamics. And these indications, they don't necessarily imply that you need to go through a lot of measurements, and you need to do a lot of plots, and you need to do a lot of statistical analysis or such. Like, I mean, for instance, if you don't hear from team members that, well, we are over allocated, we have been over allocated, over the past period. That's an indication that the team has good health. Lean mentioned as well agenda-less meetings. I think this is also connected. Agenda-less meetings are connected to how well the team is able to interact internally. I mean, if I'm able to hold an agenda-less meeting and get what my colleagues are trying to tell me on the fly, that's also an indication that we're having robust communication within the team. I think the essence in Management 3.0 is definitely not to go back to those thorough kinds of measurement that we have carried with us from traditional offices, project management office and program office and so on. It's more being it's more relying on these indicators, transparent indicators, relying on common sense, relying on intuition as well. I mean, sometimes we've got to have intuitive thinking. We've got to rely on our gut feeling. We've got to rely on our emotions. I don't have information about, we don't have information about everything in the world.
Yeah.
There's
part of this that has to be like a humble perspective as well, right?
Yeah.
Actually, so I know that Jonathan's been in the trenches of this for a while, so I'm going to pick on you again, Jonathan, and I know we're past the hour, but if people still are finding interest in this conversation, we'll probably wrap it up in the next couple of minutes. But I just want to hear from Jonathan about this whole, like, can we measure that we're on the right track? Because I know you've experimented with quite a few things with your team.
I think yeah, and we're still in transition, and a lot of our clients also work in a very traditional way, and so there are the very budget and time-based measures that are just imposed on us regardless. So I think that's in a way quite a good test, actually, because the strengths of that system are getting things done. And so actually the Management 3 worldview, is it a better way to exist and do work as a human being, but also get work done? And so some of those things are forced on us, whether we like it or not, is very useful. What I tend to do if we're looking to improve something is say, okay, where are we and what direction is it going in, rather than target and then try, okay, let's break ourselves getting there, or feel like success or failure based on the largely arbitrary figure. And then I think somebody else sort of hinted at this, which is just the fact that actually if a group of people feel something and then at the next meeting they don't anymore, or they feel differently about it, that's kind of the thing that prompted the change in the first place. And that's also then, has it been solved? And that sounds incredibly loose or whatever, but it really, ultimately that's what's triggered it. It's because people feel a certain way. Do they still feel like that at the next meeting?
Exactly.
Yes or no? Do we need to change? And so it's kind of a lot of ongoing questions. What's our current question is kind of more important than what's our current target, I guess.
Exactly. And I think that's where the processes with agendaless meetings and also experimentation comes in, because then we're a lot better at taking the current temperature check and then navigating as the temperature is changing. Like, yes, we were on board with this. Suddenly this doesn't make as much sense as it did. Are we tweaking it? Are we stepping away from it and doing something different, right? So it's part of getting, and again, this is like managing the system. This is like getting some systems in place that's helping that kind of back and forth navigation as a team. And again, we need to, I think the image of this, the starlings murmurating, right? Like constantly moving and getting that feedback and figuring out where are we going to land all these thousands of birds. That's not just like we're going here. It's like, no, we're going there and then we're going there and ooh, well, it turns out we're here. Like, so that's that process. And I think that we need to be more comfortable embracing that's what it looks like, and it's not as easy to measure. So Eddie, thank you very much for your question. There was not a simple answer, as you can hear. So thank you all of you for also sticking for a little bit longer. Feel free to reach out to me via email. I'm going to send out the recording here afterwards, and you might also hear more through my newsletter. But thank you very much for joining. I'm glad this was something that you're curious to hear more about. And sorry again, thank you for being part of this and representing your organization in this conversation. So
thank you very much.
Yes,
Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Oh, bye.
Bye-bye. And if anyone has any last questions, I'm happy to linger on the phone line here if there's other things that you want addressed or have questions for. So, bye-bye, Eddie.
Hi, Eddie.
Okay, so I am gonna stop the recording now.
Mm-hmm.